Oh yeah, that was so brutal, man. Well, this is Middle-earth, Shadows of Mordor, and today we'll be testing the Radeon HD 5850 with this game. This is of course the next part in my Radeon HD 5850 in 2015 video series, where we examine the Radeon 5850 and its performance with much more current titles. Now I think I've said Radeon 5850 way too many times, so let's get on with the show. Shadows of Mordor came out September of 2014 on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. It did make its way to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 a couple months later, however I would not recommend purchasing those versions because downporting from the PS4 and Xbox One did not work out very well, especially in light that they are almost decade-old hardware. But today we're asking ourselves, how does a $300 video card from 2009 handle a game from 2014?
I've been looking forward to this.
In testing the Radeon HD 5850, I'm looking for three important attributes when running this game. Number one is 1080p resolution. The kind of graphics and textures we're seeing in games these days really can only be enjoyed with a bare minimum 1080p image. Tying in directly to that is we need consistent 30 FPS performance. Dips are okay, even dips down to 25 FPS, and the very occasional dip down to like maybe 20 FPS is okay. And number three, the game can't look like ass. And I'm not talking about a nice, beautiful, round ass, I'm talking about a horrible, flat, super hairy, nasty ass. Which is what us PC gamers really just do not want to see. But sort of luckily, thanks to diminishing returns, often enough the lower settings in a lot of newer games actually still look pretty good, and the higher settings that we go up to just make the game look even better. Lucky for us, this game does have a built-in benchmark and we will be using it for preliminary testing. We will test the low, medium, high, and ultra presets. But benchmarks can't be everything, so in the end it will come down to gameplay. After which I will present my conclusions about how the 5850 handles this game and what are some of the best settings I would recommend. As any good PC title should, Shadows of Mordor has a very comprehensive list of graphics options that we can choose from and set to our own needs. Unfortunately, depth of field, order independence, transparency, and tessellation can only be toggled on and off. So let's jump into preset benchmarking, with all four presets running at once. Despite being limited to 1GB of video memory, we're still able to run the ultra and high presets for textures. This game does recommend that we do have a 3GB video card for running high and a 6GB video card for running ultra. It's even recommended that we have 2GB of video memory for running medium textures, but the Radeon 5850 with its 1GB of video memory handles medium textures perfectly fine. We can see here that high and ultra settings are too much for this video card, however medium gives us very good frame rates. And because of that, we'll use it as our starting point before we start making our customizations to the graphics options. After some dabbling about with the graphics settings in this game, I've been able to run it with a nice mixture of high and medium settings. The only thing being set to low is the shadow quality. The caveat of setting it to low is the disabling of self-shadowing as well as point shadow lights from fires. That gives the game much more consistent performance above 30 FPS. And despite being set to low, this game still looks pretty good. Even at low, we still retain global shadows. But the shadow level of detail is much more aggressive at low settings, especially on the side of buildings. We see that they are very ugly and very low res. As mentioned previously, point shadows from sources like fires are disabled at low settings. Putting shadows back up to medium will re-enable the point shadows as well as self shadows and will decrease the amount of LOD on the shadows themselves across the world. When fighting hordes of enemies around fires, expect your frame rate not to be at 30 frames a second, but just below it. Self-shadowing does give added visual depth to the characters in the game, so I prefer to have shadows set to medium despite the sometimes substantial cost of frame rate. You can see here that the frame rate falls to as low as 14 frames per second sometimes.
Ready to die!
Fighting enemies in much more open areas tends to give you more consistent performance, even with this many enemies on screen at once.
Stay back if you want to keep your head!
As can be seen, shadow settings play a very big part in performance, but we can push some of the other settings like mesh, vegetation, geometry, and even texture filtering quite hard. But if you are running with a Radeon 5850, your mileage may vary, especially if you're running your card overclocked. I would recommend leaving off any types of camera blur. They tend to be very hard on the graphics processor. However, just having FXAA by itself is perfectly fine, as well as having depth of field and tessellation. Going back to our performance metrics, does the Radeon 5850 meet the 3 required criteria while running Shadows of Mordor? I would conclude with a general yes. The Radeon 5850 can manage 1080p, 30 FPS, and pretty good graphics. And while the game still looks great, we're starting to see the Radeon 5850's age with this title, especially when we consider how bad the game runs with medium shadows. But we could also conclude that's just a poor area of optimization with this one particular game. And despite the frame rate drops, I still prefer to have medium shadows on despite the performance, which could be mitigated by substantial overclock of the 5850. But that's a decision you have to make up for yourself, and I might cover that at a later point in time. So in conclusion, we have another winner with the Radeon 5850. Despite performance issues, the game still looks great, runs 1080p and 30 FPS. While we optimally would not have this video card running this game, if you're stuck with the Radeon 5850, you're still in for a pretty good experience. Thanks for checking this video out. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and leave a comment down below. I really appreciate comments. I do respond to them. So take care, and I'll see you next time.